Again, just help us understand how important the number of companies in steel manufacturing and fabrication are in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
Yeah, well, it's enormous in the Soo here. It's interesting, though, that you showed a picture of the freighter coming through the St. Mary's River in the opening shot there. Those freighters come from Minnesota with raw materials that are purchased from the U.S. to make Canadian steel. They travel through the American lock at Sault Ste. Marie, and then they dock and unload at Algoma Steel to make product that gets shipped back to the United States. So this really is an integrated supply chain that it makes very little sense to disrupt in this way. But the local impact is, 50% of our economy is directly or indirectly tied to Algoma. So that means when Algoma hurts, home improvement stores hurt, grocery stores hurt, retailers hurt, restaurants hurt. And that's going to be the case if these steel tariffs are in place for any significant period of time.
So build on that a little bit, if you would. The union representing steel workers has called this catastrophic, with a 50% impact of the economy. With tariffs at 50%, you said it makes little sense. What impact will this have?
Well, the company, I think, has publicly said that they're looking at a number of different scenarios, but I don't think there is any scenario in which it makes continued sense to ship out to the U.S. at a 50% tariff rate. And that's that's more than half their sales production. So that means that half of their production evaporates essentially overnight. So that's why, Mr. Slater from the 2724 union makes a lot of sense when he's saying that this is something that the federal government needs to step in with a stopgap measure, whether it is by procuring Canadian steel immediately for defense contracts or by subsidizing, EI programs or enhancing, I should say, EI programs for those who are laid off, because there is going to be very immediate and short-term impacts that need to be mitigated. Otherwise, a place like the Soo is going to, hit an economic depression very quickly.
We'll talk about federal supports in just a second, but again, in terms of unable to continue with that kind of production at Algoma, you used in an interview the other day publicly the word unsustainable for Sault Ste. Marie. What does that mean? Total collapse? What does that look like in your community?
Well, I think it's easy to point to the mills in Pittsburgh as an example of what could happen if a mill is not supported. You've seen Rust Belt communities. These communities, frankly, that the president is trying to point to and say we need to bring back production to these facilities. Well, what we're telling the federal government is forget about bringing back. We don't want to have to bring back after something is lost. Support us while we're still here. Just as they have, frankly, over the last 4 to 5 years, they've invested hundreds of millions from the provincial and federal government to try and upgrade the processes at the mill because it needs to be sustainable long term. And they would lose that investment if there is not an immediate stopgap for the loss of production that Algoma is going to be facing, because we could end up like those communities in and around Pittsburgh that, that President Trump is pointing to as a symbol of American decline.
In terms of the stopgap, the statement that came out from the Prime Minister's office last night mentions, again, the commitment that every dollar collected in Canada from retaliatory tariffs, and as far as steel and aluminum, that's a nearly $30 billion package, that every dollar of that will go to supporting the Canadian workers and businesses who and that are affected. Has that been coming through yet?
Not that we've seen. There is, excuse me, there is, the promise that there will be supports in place, the promise that contracts for defense programming and Canadian projects will be made with Canadian steel. But when it was at 25, when the tariffs were at 25%, you could have that conversation over the course of a 6 or 7 month period, and the plant could still sustain itself throughout those negotiations. But at 50%, there needs to be implemented solutions, I'm saying, within the next 2 weeks.
2 weeks, it's that immediate. The response needs to come. And what is your plan? Any meetings, any discussions on the books to get to that as quickly as possible?
Yeah, so when the tariffs were first announced by President Trump last Friday at a rally, I learned of the news, the way most people did through the media. And that prompted me to reach out to our provincial and federal representative, as well as the steel plant directly. We have a meeting on the books later this week. And I think the idea is that, we are all Saultites. And so we are going to be looking out for what the best interests of our communal residences, with the hope that the federal government, the provincial government, and to the extent it's possible, the municipal government will be able to support the industry directly or support employees or, come up with concepts for job retraining or stopgap measures that can be implemented right away.
And as I look at the Prime Minister's statement last night, it says that the federal government this is the quote, engaged in intensive and live negotiations to have these tariffs reduced. We are fighting to get the best deal for Canada. Are you confident that that fight is of the nature it should be, given the really intense circumstances right now? Do you still have confidence in what the federal government is doing?
So it's very much like Bill Slater said, the president of the 2724 union. I mean, we can never predict what's going to come out of Washington. So the negotiations are critical for the long term. But if it takes 6 or 8 or 12 months to get to a negotiated settlement with the American administration, we need something that's going to help the steel plant in the interim. So yes, I think that the negotiations are the best path out of this over the course of the next weeks, months, hopefully, as short of a time frame as possible. But it is going to require that we have supports in place until we get to that point.
Mayor Shoemaker, again, I thank you for your time, thinking of your community, and we'll be back in touch again as we listen in to those meetings, important ones, later this week. And as we look here live again at pictures, that's the St. Mary's River with Sault Ste. Marie, American side, Canadian side, an integrated steel industry now feeling the very great effects of what is now 50% tariff on Canadian steel imports into the United States.